Good morning and welcome to our presentation. Today our topic is really interesting. It's about marijuana legalization in Mexico. As far as we know, drugs legalization is nowadays a proposal in Mexico, where people is trying to modify laws that prohibit consumption, sale, and production about marijuana. This is because, as far as we know, people is arguing that they have the right to consume it freely and they have the right to live their lives as they want, where the state is obliged to respect these decisions about what a person can consume, even though it's taken to avoid mafias and drug trafficking. Well, with this, we are going to have a brief history about marijuana.
The history of marijuana in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. 5,000 years ago, the Chinese Emperor Shennong used marijuana. He wrote about its medicinal values. It helped gout, malaria, and rheumatism. Ironically, it was also a cure for absent-mindedness. Over the millennia, use of weed spread to the Indians, dots not feathers, who used it recreationally. Europeans were smoking the herb by 500 AD. The Muslims also like to get stoned. The Quran bans the use of alcohol, so they created hashish, its use spreading through Persia and North Africa in the 12th century. Thanks to the Spanish, marijuana crossed the Atlantic in 1545. Olé. The English brought weed to Jamestown in 1611, where it became alongside tobacco a commercial crop, its fibers used for rope, cloth, and paper. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were both marijuana farmers. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence on paper made from the plant. The first American flag was woven from marijuana fibers. God bless America. Between 1850 and 1942, marijuana was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia. And just as Emperor Shennong had realized almost 5,000 years earlier, it could be used to help with rheumatism, along with relieving nausea and labor pains. During this time, cotton overtook marijuana as the major cash crop in the southern United States. In 1910, the Mexican Revolution brought many immigrants to the United States. They brought with them recreational marijuana use. Anti-immigrant sentiment sparked the first legal attacks against marijuana, and in 1913, California became the first state to make pot illegal. In the Roaring '20s, cannabis really hit its recreational stride. Jazz musicians and showbiz types were the main users, spreading its use through clubs called tea pads sprouting up in cities around the country. These clubs were not initially considered a threat, as patrons caused no problems in the community and the drug wasn't illegal. This soon changed as racism again raised its ugly head. The white establishment believed that marijuana was causing white girls to sleep with black men and breaking down the social order. By the 1930s, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Narcotics claimed marijuana was addictive and that it was a gateway to stronger narcotics. In 1936, the infamous and now cult movie Reefer Madness was released, financed by a church group. Who else? The movie claimed smoking marijuana would lead to manslaughter, suicide, rape, and insanity. By the 1950s, marijuana became part of American high culture, with Beat Generation writers and tokers like William S. Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, and Allen Ginsberg forming the vanguard. The 1960s saw marijuana break on through to the new countercultural mainstream, smoked by hippies, dropouts, war protesters, students, and the Beatles. It became an enduring symbol of rebellion against conformity and authority. Insanity took hold of the U.S. Congress in 1970 when they passed the Controlled Substance Act, the law that classified heroin, LSD, and marijuana as Schedule I drugs. In 1975, the Mexican government destroyed the entirety of its country's marijuana crop. Colombia became the main weed supplier to the U.S., and the drug cartels were born. During the Reagan-Bush years, the war on drugs created a zero-tolerance policy for marijuana use. Mandatory sentencing for possession explodes the prison population. Millions of young men, mostly black and Hispanic, are incarcerated for nonviolent drug-related crimes. The prison industrial complex rises. Today, the United States has 25% of the world's prison population and incarcerates more of its citizens than any country in the world. In 1993, Bill Clinton becomes president of the United States. He admits to having used marijuana. During the 90s, marijuana use comes back into fashion. In 1996, California becomes the first state to legalize medical marijuana. Alaska, Oregon, and Washington follow suit in 98. Maine does the same in 99, as do Nevada, Colorado, and Hawaii in 2000. In 2001, George W. Bush is given the presidency of the United States. He also admits to using marijuana. During W's presidency, Montana, New Mexico, Michigan, Vermont, and Rhode Island legalized medical marijuana. Marijuana goes mainstream. World-class athletes, business people, politicians, and entertainers all come out of the marijuana closet. The stigma fading. In 2009, Barack Obama becomes president. That guy admitted to smoking a lot of weed. Arizona, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, and D.C. all make medical marijuana legal during the Obama presidency. In 2012, Washington and Colorado become the first states to legalize recreational marijuana use. In 2014, Florida goes to the polls on November 4th. What happens next is up to us.
After the video, we are going to ask ourselves, what is marijuana? Marijuana is dry leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds from the plant Cannabis sativa. Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, is the component that is illegal. Although it is considered an illegal substance by the government, legalization is on its way. Now that we know what is marijuana, we have to know also the consequences. Currently, marijuana is a widespread. But why is that widespread? The clear majority of those who condemn argue that it's a gateway to other drugs. As a psychoactive substance, one of the effects of marijuana is the alteration of the proper functioning of the brain. And the effect associated with marijuana and other psychotropic substances is a motivational syndrome by which a person presents passivity, apathy, indifference, fatigue, etc. These are the common things that happen when you consume marijuana. So, women who use this drug generally experience a change in their menstrual cycle because of the THC in the hypothalamus, which regulates the release of hormones from the pituitary gland. But what are the percentages of marijuana consumption in Mexico? Well, currently 5% of the urban population aged between 12 to 65 years old has used illegal drugs sometime in their life, of which 11% are men and about 1% of women. So, consumption for men between 12 and 4 years old was 4%, and this is the group with higher percentage of drug consumption by the type and frequency. The drugs most frequently used is marijuana with 5%, followed by cocaine that was 1.4%, while consumption of inhalants, hallucinogens, and heroin is reported than 1%. But here, the situation in Mexico, for example, in April of 2009, the Congress decreed drug dealing when government eliminate all penalties for drug use. For example, these contents are like 5 grams of cannabis, 2 grams of opium, zero point 0.5 grams of cocaine, 15 milligrams of heroin, and 40 milligrams of methamphetamines. But how Mexican society has taken this new law? On October the 14th of 2008, by the majority parliamentary group PRD, Partido Revolucionario Democrático, legislative reforms initiative was introduced to legalize the farming, distribution, and consumption of marijuana. Both initiatives have led to the realization of two major forums on the subject. One organized by the Asamblea Legislativa del Distrito Federal and the other by the House. They were in favor and against both federal and state authorities as scientists, intellectuals, academics, journalists, artists, etc. So the report of Global Commission argues why the war on drugs has been a failure and how others have yielded better results. For example, UN figures indicate that drug use has increased from 1998 to 2008. In this period, opiate users increased by 35.5%, the cocaine in 27%, of 85% of cannabis. As you see, it's a big difference. So let's see a video about how people is reacting about the topic of marijuana.
Growing and selling marijuana is illegal in Mexico, but that hasn't stopped Expo Weed. The organisers of the three-day marijuana fair and conference in Mexico City aim to counter popular misconceptions about the plant and campaign to make it legal, particularly for pain relief. A bill permitting the use of medical marijuana is due before Mexico's parliament this month.
Here in Mexico, we have a proposal that is really interesting. Smoke the vote, as we say. But what is the final situation about the government initiative? The initiative came from when the government failure was exposed during the 20th century against drug trafficking. Due to it was considered as an international major business, and how these organizations started to be powerful. But so in a legal way, we have to know what about the process. The process is to emphasize prevention legal amendments already adopted, treatment and rehabilitation of drug addicts, forcing the Ministry of Health to develop and implement a national program for prevention of addictions, and at the same time, decriminalize consumption, placing this issue in the field of the public health. As a conclusion, we have that marijuana should be legal because prohibition doesn't help Mexico in any way. Plus, it causes a lot of problems. There is no scientific evidence that suggests prohibition decreases drug use. But there are several theories that suggest prohibition might actually increase drug use. Also, one effect of marijuana prohibition is that it makes the drug available to minors. Marijuana dealers usually don't care how old a buyer is, as long as they have the money. It is actually easier for high school students to obtain marijuana than is alcohol. This is because alcohol is illegal and therefore regulated to keep it away from teenagers. If marijuana were legal to people above the age of 21, like alcohol, then it would be harder for teenagers to obtain it. Prohibition is not working, and I believe that education and treatment are better ways to address these drug problems. So you decide, is positive or negative. In the end, it's your choice. Thank you and good morning.